Story 1: Skyrim's Secret. If there are any Skyrim players on here, beware of a place called Husfertap Manor. It exists just outside of the playable area in the southwesternmost end of the map, directly south of Markarth. You'll see it on the edge of a mountain as what appears to be a clearing with a rectangular white structure at one end. I found it one day playing around with the console commands on the game. See, I was bored and decided to explore beyond the playable boundary of the game, as developers tend to leave some interesting Easter eggs or unfinished concepts in the great beyond. So I used a command allowing myself to clip through the invisible wall that prevents you from leaving the map and explored around a bit. For the first hour or so, I didn't really see much besides empty forest and mountain ranges. I did come across the model for what looked like an early concept for the farmer, and one of the developers apparently carved his initials into the side of a mountain, but that was really about it. Finally, while approaching the southwest mountain range, I thought I saw what looked like a structure on the other side. My curiosity sparked. I clambered up the mountain with surprising ease and landed in a large grassy yard in front of an enormous white mansion. In front of the mansion was a simple wooden sign that read Husfertap Manor. The mansion itself was surprisingly low-res for a game this recent, and lacked a lot of graphical detail aside from two large rectangular windows on either side of the door, and for featureless columns lining the porch. The lawn was also very rudimentary, lacking any sort of decoration or graphical texture, and existing instead as little more than a wide sea of green. This must have been a planned location that was abandoned early on in development. I entered the mansion, which turned out to be nothing more than a bare frame on the inside. No furniture, lamps, or trophy heads were present to decorate the wood walls. The only decoration this place had was a small podium on the very back wall, with a featureless black book resting on it. I approached the book and pressed the prompt to read it, which oddly didn't give the title. It just said read, though disappointingly the page was completely blank except for a number 1 in the upper left corner. Placing the book down, I turned to leave and was unexpectedly greeted by an NPC I hadn't seen on the way in. It was a young woman, apparently a nod, with jet black hair and wearing a long blue gown. She sort of looked like Lydia, but thinner and with longer hair. The woman stood in the center of the mansion, just staring at me and turning her head to follow me as I walked around her. As I came to about even with her, she said bluntly, "Wealth is temporary. What is here today will be gone tomorrow." I wasn't sure exactly what this meant. Maybe some unrealized quest involving retrieving this woman's stolen gold. I determined there was no more to see here and left the mansion. This was certainly an interesting find. An entire location and character forgotten in the code of the game, and I had just uncovered them. And speaking of the character, I intended at some point to find that woman's code so I could bring her to the main game and make her marryable. She was kinda hot. Unfortunately, this high point would be overwritten by a horrible next day. On the way home from work, someone came up behind me, knocked me over, grabbed the wallet out of my pocket and ran off. I didn't see their face, only that they were wearing jeans and a black hoodie. That wasn't really a tremendous help to the police, who said they'd try to find the suspect, but without an actual physical description, it'd be difficult. This definitely sucked Even though I can call and cancel my card, I had about $80 in that wallet, and I'm damn near broke as it is. For some reason, I couldn't help but recall what that woman in Skyrim said. Wealth is temporary. What is here today will be gone tomorrow. I knew it sounded silly, but I couldn't shake that phrase from my mind. Maybe there was a connection. I ultimately dismissed this thought as ridiculous. After all, whoever heard of a magic fortune-telling video game? However, I did need some cheering up after this. I fired up Skyrim and decided to return to Husfertap Manor. As last time I neglected to find out the mysterious woman's name, which would be helpful if I'm going to hack her code and marry her. After journeying back to that end of the map and killing a very persistent dragon along the way, I climbed back over the mountain and reached the mansion. Something was different about it, though. The bright white that had cloaked the mansion yesterday had now faded into an almost dirty white, and the windows were coated in a thin layer of dust, making the view inside slightly translucent. I approach anyway and step inside. To my surprise, the woman had seemingly undergone a change as well. She was a few inches taller, her hair was also a lighter shade than before, and she had more noticeable frown lines. It was almost as if she had aged to some degree. Not drastically, but she definitely wasn't the hot young 20-something I ran into yesterday. The woman's deep blue gown also looked a bit faded, as though it had aged. As I approached, I noticed that the prompt to talk to her never appeared, making it impossible to know the woman's name. When I looked to face her, she offered me a faint smile coupled with a slight sigh, almost like she was faking being happy to see me. "A man works hard for his coin," she said suddenly, "but when he ceases to be useful, he is cast away to starve." Great. Another cryptic message from an unmarriable NPC of unknown name in a bear house, with nothing but a useless book. Disappointed, I left Husfertap Manor, or what I intended to be the last time. It was a neat find, but there wasn't anything of real value there. The next day, I was hit with another whammy. As I came into work at the corner gas station, my boss pulled me into his office and told me that the place had gone over budget, and he had to let a few of us go. And sadly, a certain someone was among these few. I tried to explain my financial state, as well as the little incident yesterday with my wallet. But my boss merely apologized and said that there was nothing he could do, that he simply didn't have enough money to pay me. Whatever. That was a crap job anyway. As I walked home, a thought came to me, besides my hatred for my boss. That is, this was twice that the woman in blue had predicted my fate. The other day, she said something about the loss of wealth right before I get mugged, and just now she mentions workers being cast away, and here I am unemployed the next day. I know I just dismissed this thought as silly, but what if the mysterious woman was predicting my future? That night I decided to show the Easter egg to one of my friends, who'd also been trying to explore the outer fringes of Skyrim with no luck. I had explained to him all the weird things that had happened, including being mugged, losing my job, and the cryptic messages that predicted both. "Dude, that's so weird," my friend said when I told him what happened, though I wasn't sure if he fully believed me. "I know," I replied. "I'm kind of afraid to go back, but maybe I can use this as a heads-up from now on." I started up the game and returned to the mansion, which was now in even worse shape than yesterday. It looked like the white paint was actually starting to peel off, revealing a stony gray undercoat. Tiny cracks were also beginning to form here and there, if nothing else giving the mansion some texture and personality, albeit an unpleasant one. When I entered, I saw that the woman had aged again as well. This time her hair was beginning to gray, and she had noticeable wrinkles on her face. She looked like she was about in her 50s this time around. Her dress was also beginning to tatter and lose its color. "I thought you said she was a young woman." My friend said she was last time. "She ages every time you visit the house," I replied. My friend was confused by this, and with good reason, seeing as how NPCs in this game don't age. As I approached, the woman exhaled, and her face almost looked sad. "Your home is your sanctuary, and you do all you can to preserve it," she spoke. "But what happens when others aren't as responsible?" Her tone sounded very melancholy. "Did you hear that?" I asked my friend in an alarmed tone. "I didn't hear her say anything, dude," he said. When she opened her mouth, all I heard was static. I packed up my computer in a hurry, ran out the door as fast as I could, and tore down the street towards my apartment. Maybe I could get home in time to stop whatever was going to happen. Just because the game predicted it doesn't mean it's happened yet, right? There still might be time, I thought to myself. There might still be time. I didn't need to get close to see the flames. What used to be my apartment building was not a glowing orange inferno. Firemen were already at the scene attempting to quell the fire, but it wouldn't be enough to salvage my burning home. Speechless, I could do nothing but look on in despair at my room, crumbling and falling to pieces before my eyes. "I'm gonna have to ask you to stand back, sir," one of the firemen ordered me. "What the hell happened?" I cried. "One of the residents left their stove on and gas spread into the air. We think that they went to light a cigarette and the entire room went up in flames." The fireman explained. "Did you live here?" I nodded, and the fireman apologized and offered his condolences. I didn't know what to think. On the one hand, I was glad I wasn't inside the apartment, thanks to my discovery of this Easter egg. However, I had just lost everything I owned in that fire, all except for my laptop and this copy of Skyrim. Luckily, my friend let me stay at his place for a while, so at least I had a roof over my head. For the next week or so, I focused on trying to find another job so I could rent a new apartment room. Yet I was having no luck whatsoever. I told my girlfriend, Susan, the whole situation, from the mugging to me getting fired to my apartment burning down. However, I did leave out the part about the Skyrim fortune teller. She is neither a gamer nor superstitious. Susan was overcome with sympathy towards my situation and offered to talk to her boss to see if I could get a job where she works. She really is one of a kind, I thought to myself. Of course, I still put out what must have been 8 job applications that day, just to be safe. Afterwards, I was mentally exhausted and ready to get lost in my video game once again. I decided not to visit Hosfertap this time, though. I just needed a normal session of escapist fantasy to relax my mind. All was going well for a bit. I took on a few random quests, raided a bandit camp, and brought down a few bears. Then, mysteriously, a courier approached me in the forest. He did his usual bit about having a letter for my hands only, and then handed me a note called Skyrim Note 367. Especially, this was made especially bizarre by the fact that I was in the wilderness when this happened, and typically couriers only hand you messages in cities. Regardless, I decided to read the odd note. I pulled up my inventory, opened the note, and saw that it only had one sentence. Do not come back. This had to have come from the woman in blue, and I understood why. Each visit causes her to age, and we both knew that. Eventually, she would be aged to death. Be that as it may, this woman had a gift that could mean the difference between life and death for me. If her predictions could help me prevent possible disaster, I needed to know them regardless of the consequences to her. The needs of a flesh and blood human being are above those of an artificial intelligence, sentient or not. I was definitely going back to the manor. I decided to immediately head for Hosford Tap after all. Reaching the edge of the map, I entered the console command and scaled the out-of-bounds mountain until I reached the mansion, which was now almost completely dilapidated. One of the support columns had fallen over, littering the front porch with rubble. The windows had all now been busted out, revealing an interior that was dusty and riddled with cracks. The exterior of the house was also checkered with spider webs, their inhabitants eyeing me cautiously. The woman inside had, as usual, aged along with the house, but a bit more drastically this time. Her hair had turned completely white. Her face was heavily wrinkled, and she was beginning to hunch over. She looked like she was in her late 60s or early 70s. Her blue gown had now faded into more of a bluish gray and was littered with rips and tears. As soon as she saw me, the woman outstretched her hands in protest and shook her head, her face conveying a look of both fear and desperation. However, she did not back away or run, as though she was fixed to that one spot in the middle of the room. I approached the woman in defiance of her protests, causing her to lower her arms and hang her head in defeat. Love is a powerful feeling. The woman choked out, her eyes glassy, as though she was about to cry. But it is so fragile in this chaotic world, which shows no mercy to even the closest of lovers. My heart dropped. The person I loved more than anyone in the world was Susan. We'd been going out for 3 years and were practically perfect for each other. If anything had happened to her, it would destroy me. I slammed my laptop shut, grabbed the keys to my friend's car, who luckily was asleep, and floored it to Susan's house. During my drive, I could only pray that I would get to her in time. I had waited several days to return to Hosford Tap. What if I already found out too late? Arriving at my girlfriend's house, I could see through the window that her kitchen light was on. Good, I thought. At least she was home. I approached the door and pounded on it several times. No answer. Susan, are you there? I called, my voice shaky from sheer terror. After a few seconds, I knocked again, my strikes louder and more frantic this time. Susan, please open the door. I called again, pounding furiously, to which there was no response. I was mortified now. Unable to waste another second, I rammed the door as hard as I could with my shoulder, once, and then a second time. Finally, I charged full force at the door, causing it to give way. I hurried to the kitchen only to find that my worst fear had come true. I was too late. The love of my life lay motionless on the kitchen floor, her mouth dripping foam and her head lying in a puddle of blood. I knew Susan was an epileptic. She clearly had an episode and hit her head dropped on the kitchen table. I literally felt my soul shatter into a million pieces. Not able to remove my gaze from the dead body of my girlfriend, I staggered forward and fell to my knees. If I had been here just a few minutes earlier, she may still be alive. I lifted Susan's head out of the puddle of blood and held her to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than for her to reach out and hug me back. In a way, I died that night as well. Nearly a week had passed since my girlfriend's death, yet that horrible night still burned fresh in my mind. Why wasn't I quick enough? Why hadn't I gone to receive the woman's prediction earlier? I just couldn't bear this guilt any longer. No matter which way you look at it, Susan's death was my fault. Or was it? That fortune teller had to have known for some time that this would happen. Yet she wasted all that valuable time with far more trivial predictions. I could have lived without the $80 stolen from me, or that crap job of mine. Hell, even my apartment could have been replaced. But Susan was my love, my soulmate. I had plans to marry her one day. Yet this woman, she chose to tell me the least important fortunes first, knowing what would eventually happen. Had she revealed Susan's fate from the get-go, or even informed me in her note that she hacked the game to send me, no less, I could have saved my girlfriend. This was all her fault. Hastily booting up my laptop, I could see nothing but red. I was gonna kill her. I was gonna bust down that mansion door and break her old body with the strongest weapon my character had. When the game loaded, I was at the very far end of the map, as far away from Hosfertap as I could be. Plant me wherever you want on the map, bitch. It won't save you. I barreled through the land faster than I thought my character could, mowing down any unlucky AI enemy that crossed my path. Nothing was going to get in my way. My mind was fixated. I could think of nothing more than avenging my girlfriend's death. The forests and holds of Skyrim flew past my vision in a blur of color. I literally stopped for nothing. At last I reached the mansion, which had completely collapsed into a pile of unrecognizable rubble now, and equipped my warhammer. I was just itching to bash the old woman's brains in. I ducked under the fallen beams and clambered over the piles of collapsed marble to find the woman in her usual position in the center where the building would be. This time she was older than I'd ever seen a human being. She was hunched and trembling, looking like she was hardly able to stand up. Her arms looked more like skin stretched over bones. Her hair was nothing more than thin wisps of white, and her gown existed simply as ragged strips draped over her crippled form. To be honest, the woman looked barely alive at all. In this moment, my rage and hatred gave way to almost pity. Her advanced age was clearly putting her in a great deal of pain. I put away my hammer and just stood there, at a loss for what to do. You came back. The old woman breathed in what was little more than a loud whisper. Why did you come back? Why couldn't you just stay away? I could tell she was sad, but simply too exhausted to convey it. At this time, a moment of clarity came over me. I fully understood for the first time that this woman was not a simple mindless AI acting out programming, but rather a living and thinking being who existed within the game. I didn't know where she came from or who put her there, but there she was nevertheless. What are you talking about? I caught myself asking out loud. The woman, almost as if she had heard me, raised a trembling arm to point to the book at the back end of the mansion. I was confused. The last time I looked at that book, it was blank except for a single number. What would be different now? Still, I found myself overcome by curiosity and opened the odd book once more. To my surprise, the contents of the book had completely changed. Rather than one simple number, there were now the numbers 1 through 5 running down the page, each with a different symbol by it. The first symbol was that of Skyrim Thieves Guild, the second was a silhouette of a beggar, the third of a burning house, the fourth of a broken heart, and the fifth entry blank. Wait, if this place knew my future, why was the final entry blank? Then a horrifying realization hit me. What if the woman in blue wasn't predicting my future after all? What if my visits here were actually causing all those things to happen? They did seem to happen very shortly after speaking to the woman in blue. Yes, it all made sense now. The woman wasn't at fault. She was simply the messenger of whatever was responsible for the atrocities plaguing me. Yet I had to hear her message for them to take effect. That's why she never wanted me to return here. She knew that my visits would eventually lead to Susan's death and tried to stop me. But I just wouldn't listen. Now my girlfriend was dead and my life was in shambles because of my arrogance and stupidity. Shaken, I closed the book and turned to leave, only to see a horrifying sight. The woman was dead, and her body was completely decayed. She honestly looked like a drogger with the now gray rags thrown over it. Clutched in her skeletal hand was a small note, which I dared not read, for I knew what it would say. This manor had taken everything from me, and now there was only one thing left it could take. Terrified and still furious, I switched the computer off, ripped out the game disc, and tossed it in the trash, ensuring the manor's final curse went undelivered. Nearly a month has passed since I threw the game away. I am completely broke now, and still without a job. My friend's sense of charity is gone, and he kicked me out, and I have no family who can take me in. So now I am completely alone. The only possessions I have now are the clothes on my back and my laptop, which I intend to sell after I type this so that I can finally get some fresh food for once. I still have no explanation for what happened to me or where Hosfertap Manor came from in the first place. All I know is that there are forces in this world we can't even begin to understand, and when tampered with, they will destroy us. I had to learn this lesson the hard way, and I hope that none of you make the same mistakes I did. If you happen across that mansion in your game, do not enter it and do not speak to the woman in blue. As for me, though I will always revile that place for what it did to me, every night when I go to sleep, I toy with the idea of going to the landfill and finding that copy of Skyrim, so that I can return to Hosfertap Manor and receive its last message. After everything Hosfertap has taken from me, maybe now it could finally give me something. Peace. Skyrim's Secret 2. Sean Blevins, Story 2, 13th and Elm. I always get a little uncomfortable when the topic of the paranormal comes up, particularly when some people seem to be so adamant that ghosts simply can't exist. I don't attempt to convince them otherwise. As a matter of fact, I don't share my experiences with them at all. This is actually the first time I've attempted to chronicle everything my family went through. It was only for a brief window in time, just a few months, but it burned a scar into my consciousness that will never go away. I remember my mother and father being so excited at the prospect of all of us moving into our first house. They had been raising for young children in an apartment. Just the idea of finally having our own bedrooms and more than one bathroom had us all elated. When we first glimpsed the house at the corner of 13th and Elm, my siblings and I almost couldn't believe it. The place seemed enormous. It was an old colonial-style house with wide-open rooms on the first floor and all the bedrooms on the second floor, connected by a grand old wooden staircase. My brother and sisters and I raced through the place, exploring each room with a sense of excitement and wonder. It was my brother Tommy who first noticed the door in the corner of the kitchen that led to the basement. He swung it open, and he and I stood at the top of the stairs, peering down for a few moments. We carefully descended down into the basement, unsure of what we would find. Once we got to the bottom of the stairs, we were a little disappointed with how benign it seemed to be. It was a bare room with a concrete floor, a utility sink in one corner, and a single window that would have been peering out into the garden in the front yard. We gazed around at this rather boring space for a minute before Tommy noticed it. "Hey, what's with the floor over there?" He pointed to a patch in the concrete, about 4 feet long and 3 feet wide. It was a different color and texture than the rest of the concrete. It was obviously been torn up at some point and then patched up. I didn't think much of it until Tommy spoke up. "You know the lady that lived here died, right?" "I didn't know that." I recall my mom and dad mentioning something briefly about the family that owned the house having to move out in a hurry. The circumstances behind it were never discussed, as far as I can remember. Tommy continued, "Yeah, she died in a really bad car accident. Dad said so." So I countered, growing a little uneasy. "Well, I bet that's where they buried her." "Right there," Tommy said, pointing to the odd patch in the concrete. For some reason, this ridiculous theory seemed to make sense in our child minds. I distinctly remember right at that moment, the atmosphere in the room changed. The air felt electric. I could feel all the hairs on my arms stand up. I was suddenly claustrophobic and felt a wave of panic and unease wash over me. I didn't even respond to Tommy. I dashed up the stairs as fast as I could. Tommy was right on my heels, chuckling at how easy it was to freak out his little brother. Once I was back in the kitchen with a thrum of activity going on, the feeling passed instantly, like flipping a light switch off. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and getting settled. Tommy got his own room at the top of the stairs, and I got the one next to him. Our older sisters, Cheryl and Cindy, share the bigger bedroom across the hall. My dad was a long-haul trucker who would be gone for days, sometimes a week at a time, so we had barely gotten moved into the house when he reluctantly had to go on the road for a few days. The first inkling that something wasn't quite right with the house happened the next morning after he had left. My siblings and I were walking out the front door to get on the bus to school, and we noticed a cigarette but lying on the wooden front porch. Not exactly strange, but we knew it wasn't there before. We had cleaned the house top to bottom after moving in, including the porch. A rather obvious cigarette, but lying directly in front of the door would have been noticed. But there it was. We all kind of caught each other's glances as we looked at it. We shrugged and got on the school bus and went on with our day. A few days later, my brother Tommy and I were playing outside in the yard when we noticed a second cigarette, but this time on the lawn, directly under Cindy and Cheryl's bedroom window. Once again, Tommy was there with a brilliant theory to scare the pants off of me. "I bet it's the family that used to live here. They keep coming back and hanging around outside because they know their mom is buried in the basement. The mention of the grave in the basement made my eyes wander over to the single window in the basement that was barely visible at ground level. It was at that moment that I was certain someone was looking back at me through that window. Tommy read the expression on my face and followed my gaze to the window. "We should go check it out down there," he said. I reluctantly followed him. As uncomfortable as I was going down there, I was more sensitive to looking like a wuss in front of my older brother. As we got to the door to the basement, even Tommy paused. "We should take the Patches with us," he said, referring to our family mutt. "Patches will protect us." Patches was an easy-going, agreeable fellow. I guess he would have to be, with four rambunctious children constantly terrorizing him. We found him dozing next to the couch in the living room. Tommy grabbed him by the collar and led him over to the basement door. When Tommy swung the door open, Patches immediately resisted. He plopped his butt down on the kitchen floor and refused to move an inch. Tommy yanked on his collar, but Patches pulled back. Eventually, Tommy decided to just pick the dog up and carry him down the stairs, with Patches struggling mightily the whole way. Halfway down the stairs, Patches went berserk. He yelped and growled and snapped his teeth at Tommy, who let go of him in surprise. Patches raced up the stairs and scampered under the couch. Without the dog's protection, Tommy and I abandoned our mission. That night, we were all around the kitchen table having dinner. Patches had been in a sour mood ever since the incident on the basement stairs. As we were eating dinner, Patches rested on the kitchen floor, his eyes never leaving the basement door. His ears were perked up, and his attention was focused on the door. At one point, his hackles raised, and he rose to his feet, snarling and growling at the door. We all stopped our dinner chatter and turned to look at the dog. Patches was in full-on protection mode. He was snarling like someone was coming up the stairs. This lasted for a moment before he calmed down and went back to lying down on the kitchen floor. It was maybe a night or two later when I first heard the footsteps. I was lying in bed in the middle of the night when I distinctly heard footsteps coming up the basement steps. They were heavy, very deliberate steps, slow and steady, thump, thump, thump. I strained my ears as much as I could in the darkness. When the steps reached the top of the basement stairs, there was a pause. I didn't hear the basement door open, but the steps then started through the kitchen, thump, thump, thump. When they reached the bottom of the staircase, again there was a pause. Then, just as slowly and deliberately, the footsteps started up the stairs. By this point, I was wild-eyed in terror, but I honestly couldn't think of what to do next. I was frozen in place in my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The footsteps reached the top of the staircase. At the end of the hallway leading to our bedrooms, again a pause. Then the lumbering steps started down the hallway. They slowly advanced past Tommy's room, thump, thump, thump. God forgive me, but I prayed that they continued down the hall towards my mother's room, but they did not. The steps stopped right outside of my bedroom door. There was a long, painfully drawn-out moment when everything seemed to stop. I wasn't breathing. I wasn't moving. My pulse was thundering in my ears, and every nerve in my body was howling. After what seemed like an eternity, then the next noise jangled my senses. It was a tapping noise, almost maddeningly quiet at first. Something was tapping on my bedroom door, about once every 3 seconds or so. As I strained to listen to it, I felt that I sounded rather metallic, like a key. It sounded like someone was tapping a key on my bedroom door. Tap, tap, tap. Just as I was beginning to think of an escape route, perhaps going out my bedroom window, suddenly it stopped. My eyes must have been the size of hubcaps as I stared at the door. I figured next whatever was on the other side of the door would turn the doorknob. Seconds went by. The air was thick and suffocating. I was plotting my route to my bedroom window should the door fly open. However, I was taken by surprise with the next sound. The footsteps started again, but again they started from the bottom of the basement steps. Thump, thump, thump. What the hell? How on earth did this thing get back down to the basement without me hearing it? It was at this point that I had enough. I jumped out of my bed, threw open my door, and raced to my mother's bedroom. When I entered her room and flipped on the light, I saw that she was sitting up in bed, completely awake and aware, her eyes wide and panic. She had heard it, too. When she saw me, she immediately tried to downplay the situation. She smoothed my hair and rubbed my back and tried to convince me I had a nightmare, but I knew better. I could see in her eyes she was as unnerved as I was. It was then that I realized that whatever in this house was terrifying my mother as much as it was terrifying me, and that made my blood run cold. My dad came home from his road trip, and for a few days things returned to normal. My mother and I exchanged nervous glances across the table as we had dinner with my father. He was completely oblivious to the situation, and we obviously didn't know how to bring it up with him. How do you tell a burly trucker that you heard a ghost coming up the basement steps? Eventually, he had to go out on the road again. I could sense the tension in my mother as she helped him pack up for his next road trip. She tried to play it off with us kids, but I knew better. I was dreading what was coming next as much as she was. The first night home without my father seemed to be uneventful. I was uneasy and slept fitfully that whole night, but nothing of importance happened, at least not for me. The next morning at the breakfast table, I noticed my sister Cheryl seemed to be a little unkempt. She was normally annoyingly bubbly and vibrant in the morning, but this morning she seemed a little disheveled. Eventually she turned to my mother. "Thanks for closing my window last night, Mom. The rain would have ruined everything." My mother blinked for a moment while holding the coffee pot. "What are you talking about, Cheryl?" Cheryl seemed a little confused. "Mom, you came into my room last night and shut my window, remember?" My mother was now more than a little disturbed. "No, Cheryl, I didn't come into your room." "What do you mean?" Cheryl was now frustrated. She started using that tone that preteen girls use when condescending to their mothers. "Mom, I woke up last night because it was thundering and raining outside. You were standing next to my window, and you closed it and then walked out. I remember because your white nightgown was flapping in the breeze coming through the window." The color drained out of my mother's face, and the lines around her mouth suddenly became very pronounced. I had never seen her looking so old. "Dear, I don't have a white nightgown. You know my nightgown is red. You know that. You know that, Cheryl." After a very uncomfortable few moments, my mother regained her composure and suddenly switched gears. "You had a dream, honey. It was just a dream." Confused and frustrated, Cheryl was now defiant. "No, that wasn't a dream, Mom. My window was open when I went to bed and it was closed in the morning. You closed it. Why don't you remember? My mother was flustered. Her cheeks burned red, and she stared at the kitchen table. Her head jerked up, and she looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. "Oh, you're running late, dear. Get ready for school." A few days later, Tommy and I were raising hell outside in the yard again. We came around the corner of the house and stopped in our tracks. An old tricycle that had been out in our backyard was sitting there directly underneath Cindy and Cheryl's bedroom window. On closer inspection, we noticed that the seat of the tricycle was bent slightly, as if someone very big and heavy had been standing on top of the seat. There were also not one, but 2 cigarette butts lying on the ground next to the trike. Eventually, Tommy stated the obvious. Was a guy standing on this to look in Cheryl's window? I didn't answer. I picked up the tricycle and whipped it as far as my little frame would allow back into our backyard. Tommy looked at me for a moment with a puzzled look on his face, but he let the moment pass, and we went back to playing. A couple of days passed with relatively little happening, but one morning it was Tommy who came to the breakfast table looking haggard. I questioned him about what was going on, but he waved me off. His eyes kept darting around the kitchen table as if he was looking for someone who was missing. Eventually, our mother joined us at the table, and Tommy spoke up. "Mom, did Dad get back last night?" Our mother looked dazed for a second. No, honey. Daddy didn't come home yet." "Why did you ask?" Tommy furrowed his brow and looked down into his cereal bowl for a long moment. He leveled his eyes at our mother and said, But he came in my room last night." I was getting all too familiar with the unnerved look that swept across my mother's face. She pursed her lips for a moment before croaking, "Did you have a dream last night, Tommy?" Tommy sighed and shook his head. He seemed to be far too world-weary for a boy his age. "Mom, you know I sleep with a radio on next to my bed, right?" My mother nodded her head very slowly and deliberately, her eyes never leaving Tommy's. The lines around her mouth became very pronounced again. Tommy continued, "Well, last night I woke up because the radio dial was spinning up and down, like someone was looking for a radio station. I sat up and looked, and Dad was standing next to my bed, fiddling with the radio dial." There was a long moment of silence as my mother stared at Tommy. Her lips were pursed tight, as if she had tasted something sour. Eventually she broke the silence. "Was that it? Was there anything else?" Tommy looked more befuddled than ever. He gave the room another scan, as if he couldn't believe that our father would come around the corner at any moment. "Well, I talked to him," Tommy said. Mom's eyebrows went up. "Oh," she said. "Did he say anything back?" "No," Tommy responded. "I said hi, Daddy, but he didn't say anything back. He just turned around and walked out of the room, and I went back to sleep." Our mother stared at Tommy for an uncomfortably long moment. This was the first time I noticed gray streaks hanging down in her brunette hair. In a moment she suddenly snapped back to her normal self. Her face brightened and she said, "It was just a dream, baby. You were dreaming. Don't worry about it." Tommy wasn't as convinced. He frowned deeply as he turned back to his cereal. The rest of us were mostly silent as we finished our breakfast and went off to school. The footsteps hadn't stopped in the meantime. The pattern would always repeat. The footsteps would lumber up the basement steps, then up the stairwell, and then stop outside of my bedroom door. Why was it always my bedroom door? And then it would start tapping on the door. It would tap for a while, and then the pattern would repeat back from the bottom of the basement steps. As routine as it became, I couldn't get used to it. I was as terrified on the 10th night as I was on the first. I was convinced that whatever was tapping on the door would burst in eventually. It was almost more maddening to me that it never did. It just kept repeating on that same damn loop over and over again. For how long was it doing it even when I wasn't home? One afternoon I had dozed off on the couch in the living room while watching my after-school cartoons. I started to gradually calm to a bit when I became aware of a presence within the room with me. I kept my eyes closed tightly, but my brain snapped back to awareness as my ears went on high alert. Someone was standing at the entrance to the living room, shifting uneasily from one foot to another. I could hear the wooden floorboards squeaking underneath the person's feet. The person started slowly advancing towards me on the couch. Each floorboard squeaked distinctly as the footsteps grew closer. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the couch, near my feet. Whoever this might be was now clearly standing at the end of the couch, staring at me. I sensed the presence as it started to lean over the couch, lean over me. I heard its clothes rustle slightly as it loomed over me. Its face had to be inches from mine, but I never heard nor felt its breath. It was there, but it was not breathing. It was not alive. In my panic, I started to make a high-pitched whimpering sound that I couldn't control. It was at that moment that a sharp blast of cold air washed over me, sending up goosebumps over my entire body, and then nothing. The presence was gone. I knew it immediately. It wasn't there anymore. I leapt off that couch and out of the living room, probably without even touching the ground. I started noticing my mother growing more and more uncomfortable and restless. She didn't have to say it. I knew she was experiencing things, too, whether it was watching late-night television or busying herself with household chores like staying up to sew patches on our clothes. It was obvious that she didn't want to go to bed. She installed glow-in-the-dark light switch covers in her bedroom and in the second-floor hallway. At first it seemed like a benign safety measure, until it occurred to me what those glow-in-the-dark covers actually were for. She wanted to see the shadows moving around in the dark. They couldn't be real to her unless she saw them moving through her room. Things came to a head one night, which ended up being our last night alone in the house. My father was again gone on a road trip. We were all huddled in the living room watching television with my mother. It was late, but not terribly late, maybe 10 o'clock or so. Suddenly a very heavy mood enveloped the room. We all sensed it immediately. I looked over at Tommy and Cheryl on the couch with me. The unease was evident on their faces. Cindy was sprawled on the floor in front of us. She whipped her head around and looked at the rest of us as if to say, "You feel that, too?" We did. Our mother was in the recliner beside us. Her response was to gather up Cindy off of the floor and join us on the couch. All of us huddled together. She stretched her arms around all of us. The air in the room became thick and heavy. We all kept our eyes focused on the doorway between the living room and the kitchen. It seemed whatever was causing this feeling was going to be materializing there. It was Cindy who first started to whimper and cry. She was quickly followed by the rest of us children. We were all grasping each other as tight as we could. now openly crying and blubbering. Eventually even my mother started to moan, with tears in her eyes. Patches went on full alert. He stood in the middle of the living room floor, staring at the doorway with every muscle in his body taut. His hackles raised, and he started a low rumbling in his throat. The footsteps started as they always did at the bottom of the basement steps. T-H-U-M-P. Thump. Patches started barking in a frenzy, flashing his teeth and throwing spittle. That was enough for my mother. She threw open the front door and ushered us all out of the house as if it were a fire drill. We ran to the neighbor's house, and my mother made up some excuse for needing shelter. For the night, I think she said she thought we had a gas leak or something like that. We slept fitfully on a pallet on the neighbor's living room floor. At the first sign of light the next day, we started loading up all of our earthly possessions and taking them to my grandparents' house. The house on Elm Street was the elephant in the room for my family for decades afterwards. All of us kids grew up and had families of our own, and even then, we wouldn't say much about what happened in that house. Only now do I dare to document all of it here. I don't even know why. Really, I guess I just needed to convince myself that it was all in the past, and it's all over now. So again, if you don't believe in spirits or ghosts or the paranormal or whatever, I won't try to convince you. But I know for a fact there are things shuffling around in the darkness. Story 3. It's there, in the dark. You're right to be scared of the dark. My words died in my throat. It was there. I could see it now, blacker than black, getting darker every second. It was creeping closer, sliding like it was on rails. My hands shook and my lower lip began to quiver. White-hot panic burned in my mind, and every thought but run was smoke in its wake. But I was frozen, and my feet wouldn't budge. It stopped at the edge of the light. It slid around the side, staying just beyond the patch of white on the floor. It was close, really close. The light was small, but it was everything. Mom wasn't much on church, and she never taught me to pray, but I prayed my heart out that some passing cloud didn't happen by just then. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I wasn't holding my breath, I was trying to take one and it wouldn't come. He stood like that for a long time. The hammer got heavy and my arms ached, but I didn't dare lower my guard. It was trying to get behind me when the shed door opened. "What the hell are you doing?" Mom asked. She noticed the wet patch on my jeans. "What the hell, John? I mean..." I stood there, lip quivering, hammer held high, until she took me by the arm and dragged me out into the yard and the sunlight, and into the house. She was angry about my wet jeans, but I didn't care. Mom was making dinner in the kitchen. Granddad and I were in the living room. "Once it knows you can see it, it'll come for me, won't it?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. He was having the same trouble, so he nodded. Billions of parents tell their kids that there's nothing in the dark that's not there in the light. You've done it yourself, haven't you? You repeat it until you believe it, or nearly so, and you hope your kids believe it too. But maybe it's you who need to believe. Maybe it's you who need the consolation. Maybe because you know deep down that there are things that go bump in the night. I knew it, and so did Granddad. "I'm gonna watch over you tonight. You'll be safe as houses, I promise." That helped a little. "But I'm not always going to be here." I shook my head, but he continued, "And when I'm not, you'll need to keep watch yourself. You hear me?" Yeah, the word was more breath than speech. Good. When the nightmares come on heavy, That's a sign it's around. Why does it? I'm not sure. Maybe it feeds on us at night, stealing a little bit of you when you sleep. He lit a new cigarette from the old one and puffed it to life. I think it comes for those who can see it, and maybe it ignores them that can't or won't. You know what I mean. I did. Even if Mom saw it, she would convince herself that she hadn't. I said so, and he nodded. Yeah. His tone told me that he wanted to be a little more like Mom. But what can I do? I mean to stay safe. The light, Johnny, stay in the light. Neither of us could bear to talk about it anymore. There are things you can say in the daylight that you won't dare in the dark. Instead, we watched Hogan's Heroes and Sanford and Son, took the volume down low so as not to wake Mom. Normally, we'd have been laughing, but that night we didn't even crack a smile. It was getting late, and Granddad told me to get ready for bed. I had the covers up like a shield, the lamp was on, and my room was fairly well lit. The overhead was busted, but it had always been busted, and there was a problem with the wiring. Granddad was in the corner in a battered fabric chair. He was wearing his red and black plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he had a big silver Rayvac Sportsman with him, the kind that took to D-cell batteries. Something about the chrome reminded me of a knight's sword. I felt a lot better with him there. I'll watch over you, he said. I tucked my head under the blankets. I didn't want to see it. I was tired and scared, but my eyes were heavy. At some point I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly. Granddad was still in the corner, but his flashlight was on, and he was shining it under the bed. I sat up, and he saw that I was awake. His face was pale as fresh paint, and the Rayovac shook in his hand. I could hear the batteries rattle. "Don't get out of bed," he said. W-H-A. Why? I rubbed my eyes. I was still groggy. "It's under the bed, Johnny." I was wide awake then. "Don't get out the bed," he repeated. He wasn't asking. I jumped to my feet, the saggy mattress bouncing slightly under my weight. "What did you mean?" "It's under the fucking bed. Don't move." I was 10 years old, and I'd never heard Granddad so much as say shit. This was bad, real bad. I couldn't stay on the bed no way, no how, so I ran the step or to the end of the mattress and jumped for all I was worth. No. Granddad yelled. I traveled too far and too fast and hit the window in midair, flattening the blinds and tangling in them, ripping them from the wall. When I fell backward toward the bed, Granddad was off the chair in an old man's flash, but my hand was falling into the shadow even as I tried to stop it. Upside down on the floor, I could see it too, flat as a doormat in the shadow under the bed. I snatched my hand to my chest as it reached for me, and not even a hair's breadth separated its fingers from mine. It was cold and misty, like my hand in the freezer to get ice. "Jesus, Johnny, I'm okay. I'm okay," I said, finding my feet. I hopped up and down like it was Christmas morning. "I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay." I was yelling, but I didn't know it. Granddad didn't either. But we figured it out when Mom burst through the door. "What the hell?" she yelled, her bathrobe trailing behind her like a cape. "John, Mac, what the hell is going on?" Her hands were on her hips, and her face was as red as Granddad's nose. She pointed a finger at Granddad. "If it had been a gun, he'd have been dead. You out." He gave me one long, pitiful look that said, "What can I do?" Mom stood her ground like a titan, and he trudged into the hall past her, his head down. Defeated? worried, afraid. Then it was my turn, you, in the bed. But now, what was I supposed to say? That there was a monster under the bed? That I needed Granddad to keep watch? Haven't your kids said the same thing? I picked up the Rayovac and leapt into the bed. Not flounced, not jumped, leapt, like Bruce fucking Jenner in the Olympics. When I get home, John, that threat needed no conclusion. She turned and slammed the door, but not before she switched off the lamp. I sat with the flashlight on, and I knew it wouldn't be enough. I was on the tracks tied to the rails, and the train was coming, and there was no hero waiting just off screen to run in and save the day. It was really dark in there, and there wasn't even a light peeking under the door. It was in its element. I could hear Mom giving it to Granddad in the kitchen down the hall, but I couldn't concentrate on the words. My heart was at least as loud as her cursing, and my mouth felt like it had never known a sip of water. I had the Rayovac in one hand like a spear, and I was shining the light at the edges of the bed, moving frantically from this side to that, from the headboard to my feet and back again. It was waiting, savoring my fear. You know how it does that, don't you? That's when Mom came in the instant before the bulb blew up. She saw it, and her mouth dropped open, and her eyes grew just like they did on Saturday morning cartoons. I heard her take a loud breath, the substance of a scream filling her lungs. But it was black now, and there was a rush of air, and she was gone. She was gone, gone. I was screaming, tearing at the doorknob, running down the hall toward the light. My socked feet slid on the kitchen floor, and I smashed into the cabinet hard enough to send my head spinning. The Rayovac skittered across the tired, yellow linoleum. Granddad overturned the table. He saw something, too, because it was few minutes before I could get him to see me or answer my frantic questions. It had been right behind me in the hall all the way to the edge of the kitchen. We waited there till morning. That sounds crazy, I know it, but we did. Even then, every light in the house was on as we searched my room for Mom. Of course, we never found her. Folks think she ran out just like Dad did, that the double shifts and bills and me and Granddad were just too much in the end. We knew better. I knew better. That was 1982, a long time ago. Granddad and me had a hard time of it, and soon enough I was working those odd jobs to make ends meet. They never really did. Not even close. Granddad passed before too long, and I got more help from the state and foster care. The Willis weren't so bad, and Fred and Rita did as well by me as they could. I sold the house when I turned 18. I've got stacks of bulbs in the kitchen closet. 60 watts, 100 watts, fluorescence, you name it. My lights are all rigged to a master switch in each room, too. One flip, and everything's lit. I won't have it any other way. When the nightmares command, they do come. I keep the lights on all night. The Rayovac's been replaced by a Maglite rechargeable, and I keep a Q-beam by the bed just in case. Every room has a few lamps and an overhead. The wiring's like new. I want you to know that when you get that terrible feeling, that feeling of being watched from the dark, you're not alone. When you pull the blankets up like a shield and slide your head down and pull your feet up, I do too. When you feel it watching from the dark, or pull back a cold hand dangling over the side of the bed, when you feel like a kid and try to tell yourself there's nothing there but your imagination, even though you know there's something there, there is. kids go missing all the time, don't they? And sometimes they die in their sleep even though there's nothing wrong with them. And sometimes parents just get up and go when they've had enough. But maybe, just maybe, not all those kids ran away. And maybe them that die sees something before they do. And sometimes, just sometimes, those parents didn't run off when times got hard. And you're right to be afraid of the dark and what's in it.